plan was simple: a solo backpacking trip through the Appalachian wilderness. Kevin Morrow, an experienced hiker, had been on countless trails before, but something about this one felt off. Maybe it was the strange silence that hung in the air, or the way the trees seemed to lean toward the path as if whispering secrets. Either way, he shook off the unease and pressed forward, determined to reach his campsite before nightfall. He had been planning this trip for months. The Appalachian Mountains had always fascinated him, and he wanted to challenge himself. He had checked the weather forecast, packed everything he needed: extra food, water, a satellite phone, even a knife just in case. He had told his friends his exact route, making sure they knew when to expect him back. Everything was accounted for. Yet, as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The deeper he went, the more he noticed things that didn't make sense. Birds that should have been chirping were silent. The trees, tall and ancient, seemed to close in around him. Shadows stretched in unnatural ways, twisting like fingers in the last light of the evening sun. After hours of steady hiking, he found himself at a fork in the trail that wasn't marked on his map. One path continued as expected, but the other was narrower, overgrown, and seemed barely used. A rotting wooden sign stood beside it, nailed to a tree. The words were almost completely worn away, but one thing was clear: "Do not enter." Kevin hesitated, staring down the mysterious path. The rational part of his brain told him to ignore it and keep following the marked trail. But curiosity, or maybe something more sinister, pulled him forward. His boots crunched against the undergrowth as he stepped onto the forbidden path. The deeper he walked, the more unnatural everything became. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The trees twisted in unnatural ways, their bark almost appearing scorched in places. He checked his GPS. No signal. That was normal in the mountains, but it still sent a shiver down his spine. As he walked, something caught his eye. At first, he thought he was imagining it: a flash of movement between the trees, a dark shape flitting just beyond his vision. He turned quickly, aiming his flashlight into the dense foliage. Nothing, just trees and silence. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. An hour in, Kevin noticed something disturbing. The trail behind him had vanished. There was no sign of the path he had taken, only an endless stretch of trees. Panic gripped his chest. He turned back, walking faster, then running, only to find himself back at the same place. The eerie wooden sign, still standing, was now on the opposite side of the tree. The forest was playing tricks on him. Drenched in sweat, he tried his compass. The needle spun wildly. His flashlight, which had been fully charged, began flickering. Then, in the fading light, he saw footprints. But they weren't his. They were barefoot, human, and leading deeper into the woods. Kevin's breath hitched. The prints looked fresh. A snapping branch to his left made his heart nearly stop. He spun, flashlight shaking in his grip. Something moved between the trees, just beyond the reach of the beam. A shadowy figure, tall and impossibly thin. Its head tilted unnaturally, as if watching him with invisible eyes. Kevin ran. He didn't care where, as long as he was moving. The trees blurred past him, branches cutting his arms, his legs screaming in protest. But the footsteps behind him kept pace, without sound. It wasn't running, yet it was keeping up. Then he saw it. A cabin. It looked abandoned, but it was his only hope. He sprinted for the door, slamming into it and forcing his way inside. The air was thick with dust and rot. He locked the door, breathing heavily, his back pressed against the wood. Outside, the forest was deathly silent. His flashlight finally died. For the first time since he started hiking, Kevin felt true, overwhelming fear. He sat in the dark, listening to the unnatural quiet outside. Every second stretched unbearably long. Then, the knocking began. 3 slow, deliberate taps on the cabin door. Kevin froze. His hands clenched around the knife at his side. The knocking came again, closer, heavier. Then, the door handle twisted. Kevin didn't wait. He lunged for the back window, shattering the glass as he threw himself outside. He hit the ground running, ignoring the pain in his hands and knees. He ran until he saw the faint glow of dawn, and miraculously, found the original trail. He didn't stop until he reached his car. When he got home, Kevin searched for any reports about that area. What he found made his stomach drop. Decades ago, a hiker had gone missing on that same unmarked trail. His last known stop, an abandoned cabin. The man was never found. Samantha and her best friend, Josh, had been hiking together for years. They considered themselves experienced outdoorsmen, always prepared with the right gear, maps, and survival kits. This time, they had chosen a secluded stretch of forest deep in the Pacific Northwest, miles away from any official trails. No tourists, no park rangers, just the two of them and the wilderness. They had read about an old abandoned logging road that led to a crystal clear creek where few people ever ventured. The pictures they had seen online were breathtaking, and they were eager to be the only ones there. The plan was simple: hike in, set up camp near the creek, spend 2 nights in nature, and head back before Sunday evening. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, but something about the forest felt off from the moment they arrived. As they walked deeper into the woods, the world around them seemed to change. The air was thick, heavier than normal. At first, it was just a strange feeling, an odd silence that settled over the trees. The usual sounds of the forest, birds chirping, squirrels rustling in the underbrush, the occasional buzzing of insects, had disappeared. "Dude, is it just me, or is it way too quiet?" Josh asked, adjusting his backpack straps. Samantha nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's weird. Usually, there's at least a few birds around." They tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just because they were farther out than usual. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the uneasy feeling in their stomachs only grew. By late afternoon, they reached the clearing near the creek. It should have been perfect. A serene spot with crystal clear water, surrounded by towering pine trees. Yet the moment they set foot in the area, a cold shiver ran down Samantha's spine. The first thing she noticed was the smell. At first, it was faint, like something distant rotting in the heat. But as they set up their tent and gathered firewood, it grew stronger. A thick, sickly sweet stench that made her gag. Josh wrinkled his nose. "Oh, what the hell is that?" "I don't know," Samantha said. "Smells like something dead." Josh walked toward the edge of the clearing, flashlight in hand. "Maybe an animal died nearby. I'll check it out." Samantha didn't like the idea of splitting up, but she nodded. "Be careful." She watched as Josh disappeared into the trees, his flashlight beam flickering in the growing darkness. Minutes passed. The air grew even heavier. The smell clung to the back of her throat, thick and suffocating. Then, a snap. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch broke. Samantha turned sharply toward the noise, every muscle in her body tense. "Josh," she called. Silence. Then a few moments later, Josh came running back. His face was pale, his breathing heavy. He looked like he had seen something he wasn't supposed to. "What happened?" Samantha asked, heart pounding. Josh shook his head, eyes wide. "I don't know what the hell I just saw, but we need to go. Now." He refused to talk about it as they sat by the fire, their nerves on edge. He just kept glancing toward the trees, flashlight in hand, gripping his knife tightly. That night, the silence was worse than before. The fire crackled weakly, the only sound in the vast, suffocating darkness. Samantha tried to sleep but kept waking up to something moving outside the tent. Footsteps. Not animal footsteps. Something bigger. Something that moved slowly, deliberately. She held her breath, listening as the steps circled their tent. And then, a low, rasping breath. It was right outside. She turned toward Josh, but he was already awake, gripping his knife so hard his knuckles turned white. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. For what felt like hours, they listened to the slow, heavy breathing just beyond the thin fabric of the tent. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The rest of the night was a blur of terror, of whispered conversations and sleepless hours. When dawn finally broke, they decided to pack up and leave immediately. But when they stepped out of the tent, their blood ran cold. The ground around them was covered in footprints. Not human, not animal, something else. Long clawed prints circled their tent again and again, as if whatever had been outside had been waiting for them to come out. The stench of rot still clung to the air, stronger now in the morning light. But the worst part, the part that made Samantha's stomach drop, was what they found on the trees. Deep scratches, claw marks, fresh, jagged, stretching up the trunks as high as 7 feet. Josh turned to her, face pale. "We need to go. Now." They didn't take their time packing. They grabbed what they could, leaving behind anything too heavy to carry, and ran. They ran until their lungs burned, until their legs ached. And as they reached their car, breathless and shaking, Josh finally spoke. "I saw it," he admitted, voice hoarse. Samantha turned to him, terrified. "Saw what?" Josh swallowed hard. "Last night, when I went to find the smell, I saw something in the trees." Samantha's blood ran cold. "It wasn't an animal," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "It was tall, too tall. Its limbs were wrong. It had these long, stretched-out arms, and its face." He trailed off, shuddering. "It had no eyes, just this wide, gaping mouth." Samantha felt sick. Josh met her gaze, voice filled with a fear she had never seen in him before. "It was watching us, and I think it wanted us to know it was there." To this day, neither of them have gone back into those woods, and they never will. Because somewhere, deep in that forest, something is still watching, waiting, and maybe, next time, it won't let them leave. Camping was supposed to be an escape, a way to disconnect from the stress of everyday life and immerse oneself in the peace of nature. That was exactly what Eric, Matt, and Jordan had planned for their weekend trip to the remote wilderness of Montana. They were childhood friends, now in their late 20s, all needing a break from work and responsibilities. They had chosen a secluded campsite, far from the main trails, where they could enjoy the silence of the forest, drink beer by the fire, and share old stories. The area wasn't an official campsite. There were no other hikers, no park rangers, just endless trees, the quiet ripple of a nearby river, and miles of emptiness. At first, it was perfect, but as the sun set behind the trees, the mood shifted. They weren't alone. The first strange occurrence was small, almost ignorable. As Matt gathered firewood, he noticed an old weathered tent tucked behind a thick cluster of trees, not far from their campsite. The fabric was torn and sun-bleached, the entrance flap barely hanging on. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. "Guys, come check this out," Matt called. Jordan and Eric joined him, peering inside the abandoned tent. It was empty, except for a single shoe. Old, muddy, torn. "That's weird," Jordan muttered. "Do you think someone left it here?" Eric shrugged. "Maybe a hiker got lost or left in a hurry. Or maybe..." Matt grinned. "Bigfoot got him." They laughed it off and headed back to their camp, brushing away the uneasy feeling gnawing at their stomachs. They didn't know it yet, but that was the first sign. The first warning. Strange noises in the night. That night, they sat by the fire, drinking and sharing stories. Everything felt normal again. The eerie silence from earlier had faded, replaced by the crackling flames and the occasional howl of a distant coyote. Then around midnight, Jordan heard it. A noise, not an animal, not the wind, but breathing, heavy, slow breathing. Coming from the darkness just beyond the firelight. He turned quickly, heart pounding. "Did you guys hear that?" Matt and Eric looked at him, confused. "Hear what?" Jordan scanned the darkness, eyes narrowing. It sounded like someone breathing. They listened. Silence. Then, a soft crunch of footsteps in the dirt. Jordan shot up, grabbing his flashlight. "There's someone out there." The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and empty space. No movement. No one. Eric sighed. "Dude, you're paranoid. It's probably an animal." Jordan wasn't convinced. He knew what he heard, but eventually, he let it go. That was their second warning. They went to bed around 1 a.m., retreating to their separate tents. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows against the canvas walls. Jordan lay awake, uneasy. Then, the zipper on his tent moved. His breath caught in his throat. Something, was unzipping it. In slow, jerking movements, the zipper inched downward. Jordan's blood ran cold. He grabbed his flashlight and ripped the tent open. Nothing, just the dark forest and the cold night air. His breathing was ragged, his heart slamming against his ribs. He stayed awake for hours, staring at the tent entrance, waiting. Eventually, he must have fallen asleep. And when he woke up, there were footprints, right outside his tent. Bare footprints. Morning came with an eerie stillness. Jordan didn't say anything at first, afraid of being ridiculed. But when Matt and Eric emerged from their tents, they noticed something else. Their cooler was open. The beer and snacks they had stored inside were scattered across the ground. "Did you guys get up last night?" Eric asked, looking at the mess. Matt shook his head. "Nope. I passed out." Jordan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "I told you, someone was out there." Matt's expression shifted. He wasn't laughing anymore. That's when they saw it. On one of the trees near their tents, something was carved into the bark. A single word. "Stay." They froze. None of them had done that. None of them even had a knife sharp enough to carve that deep. A wave of real fear crashed over them. "We need to go," Eric said. Now that they packed up faster than they ever had before, stuffing their gear into backpacks, not even bothering to be neat. Every moment spent in that clearing felt wrong. As they moved toward the trail leading back to their car, Jordan glanced over his shoulder one last time. And that's when he saw him, a man, standing at the edge of the trees. He was barefoot, his clothes tattered and covered in dirt. His face was thin, hollowed out, as if he hadn't eaten in weeks. His eyes were wide and unblinking, watching, just watching. Jordan's breath hitched. He grabbed Matt's arm and pointed. "Go, now." They ran. They didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't speak. They ran until they reached their car, breathless and shaking. They threw their bags inside, slammed the door shut, and peeled out of the dirt road as fast as possible. As they sped away, Matt broke the silence. "Did you see him?" Jordan nodded. "Yeah." Eric's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. "Who the hell was that?" No one answered. Because they didn't know, and they never wanted to find out. When they finally made it home, Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that they had gotten lucky. That if they had stayed one more night, they wouldn't have made it out. A week later, curiosity got the best of him. He searched online for missing hikers in the area, and he found something. A news article. A story about a man who had gone missing in those woods 10 years ago. A hiker who had set off alone and never returned. They never found his body, just his tent and his shoe. There's something about the wilderness that makes it feel like another world. The trees stretch high into the sky, their shadows twisting and turning in the wind. The deeper you go, the more isolated you become. No phone signal, no houses, no people. Just endless trees, whispering leaves, and the unknown. Hiking is supposed to be an escape from the chaos of daily life, a chance to breathe fresh air and enjoy the beauty of nature. But sometimes, nature hides something darker. Sometimes, the feeling of being watched isn't just your imagination. Sometimes, the sound of footsteps behind you doesn't belong to another hiker. And sometimes, the trails that are supposed to lead you home don't. The stories we've shared tonight are just a glimpse into the unexplained horrors that lurk in the great outdoors. People go missing in the woods every year, vanishing without a trace. Some are found miles away in places they had no way of reaching. Some turn up with no memory of what happened. And some are never found at all. How many of them saw something they weren't meant to see? How many felt that cold breath on their necks before everything went black? And how many of them are still out there, lost between this world and whatever else might exist beyond the trees? The next time you go hiking, take a moment to listen. The forest is never silent. You might hear birds chirping, leaves rustling, water flowing in a nearby stream. But listen deeper. Beyond those natural sounds, there might be something else. A whisper when no one is there. A figure moving between the trees. A feeling deep in your bones that you should turn back before it's too late. Because in the wilderness, you are never truly alone. Have you ever experienced something terrifying while hiking or camping? Share your story in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling true horror stories. And remember, some trails should never be walked.